weapon, the trade bazooka.
Ambassadors gathered in emergency financial equivalent of loading a gun. Trump is leaking classified intelligence. Good evening. I'm here to tell you about the moment when America's closest allies stopped negotiating and started preparing for economic war with weapons that could vaporize the U.S. economy in 24 hours. The most powerful weapon in modern geopolitics is not a nuclear warhead. It's $8 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds held by people who no longer trust you. And on January 17th, 2026, European ambassadors gathered in emergency session in Brussels to discuss deploying what they're calling the trade bazooka, the EU's most devastating economic countermeasure designed to do one thing: make America pay the price for threatening sovereign nations. This is not a negotiating position. This is the financial equivalent of loading a gun, chambering a round, and placing it against America's economic temple. Meanwhile, Canada has signed a $1 trillion strategic alliance with China, flooding North America with Chinese electric vehicles specifically designed to destroy Detroit. Denmark is accusing the Trump administration of espionage operations in Greenland. And France just caught the White House feeding fake intelligence directly to Vladimir Putin, confirming what allies have suspected for months. America's national security apparatus has been compromised from the top. This is not diplomacy collapsing. This is the architecture of the post-World War II order being demolished in real time, with Trump holding the sledgehammer. Today, we expose the secret European war plan to shut down American access to the world's largest market, the $8 trillion bond weapon that could trigger U.S. economic collapse, and the espionage scandal proving Trump is leaking classified intelligence to Russia while threatening to invade allied territory. European officials are now openly discussing a response to Trump's threats regarding Greenland. On January 16th, 2026, according to reports from European diplomatic sources and confirmed by officials familiar with the meeting, ambassadors from all 27 EU member states convened an emergency closed-door session in Brussels with one agenda item: activating the EU's anti-coercion instrument, colloquially known as the
Weapon, the trade bazooka. The official name is anti-coercion instrument.
This is not a tariff. This is not a trade dispute. This is the complete shutdown of European market access to American companies. The anti-coercion instrument, officially adopted by the EU in 2023 but never deployed, gives Brussels the legal authority to impose sweeping economic countermeasures against any nation attempting to coerce EU member states through threats or economic blackmail. And Trump's threat to impose 25% tariffs on nations refusing to support American ownership of Greenland, that meets the legal definition of economic coercion. According to leaked details of the Brussels meeting reported in European media, the proposed countermeasures being discussed include complete closure of the European market to American tech companies, including Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta. The EU market represents approximately 450 million consumers with purchasing power exceeding $15 trillion annually. Losing access would devastate American corporate profits overnight. Prohibition on European financial institutions processing dollar transactions for sanctioned American entities, effectively cutting targeted U.S. companies out of the global banking system. Mandatory divestment requirements forcing European pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and institutional investors to liquidate American holdings within 90 days. But the most devastating weapon in the arsenal is the one European officials are calling the bond option. Here's what most Americans don't understand about how the U.S. economy actually functions. America's ability to borrow money at low interest rates, to fund government operations, to maintain military spending, depends entirely on foreign governments and investors continuing to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. And European entities, including the European Central Bank, EU member state governments, and European financial institutions collectively hold approximately $8 trillion in U.S. Treasury debt. $8 trillion. That is not a number. That is a doomsday weapon. According to financial analysts familiar with the Brussels discussions and reports from European economic think tanks, if European holders coordinated a mass sell-off of even 20% of their treasury holdings, approximately $6 trillion flooding the market simultaneously, it would trigger a catastrophic spike in U.S. interest rates, potentially exceeding 10% within weeks. What does that mean in practical terms? The U.S. government's annual interest payments on the national debt would skyrocket from approximately $1 trillion to over $3 trillion, consuming nearly half of all federal tax revenue just to service debt. Mortgage rates would explode to 15–20%, instantly freezing the American housing market and triggering mass foreclosures. Corporate borrowing costs would become prohibitive, forcing companies to lay off millions of workers as they slash spending to survive. The dollar's value would plummet as investors flee to other currencies, making imports catastrophically expensive and triggering inflation that could exceed 30% annually. This is not speculation. This is financial mechanics. When bond prices fall, yields rise. When yields rise, borrowing costs explode. When borrowing costs explode, economies collapse. And European officials are now openly discussing whether Trump's threats justify pulling that trigger. One European finance ministry official, speaking anonymously to the Financial Times, reportedly stated, "We have tolerated American economic dominance for 80 years because it came with reliability, rule of law, and respect for sovereignty." If America becomes a rogue state threatening invasions and economic coercion, we have the tools to remind them that their economy depends on our cooperation, and we are prepared to use those tools. This is not a bluff. This is a loaded weapon with the safety off. But while Europe prepares economic countermeasures, Canada has already fired its first shot, and it's aimed directly at the heart of American manufacturing. On January 12, 2026, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney finalized what analysts are calling the most strategically damaging trade agreement in North American history, a $1 trillion 10-year comprehensive economic partnership with China. The centerpiece of this deal? Unrestricted importation of Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian market with zero tariffs and streamlined regulatory approval. Let me explain why this is an economic kill shot aimed at Detroit. For decades, American and Canadian auto industries have been integrated through complex supply chains. Parts manufactured in Michigan are assembled in Ontario. Vehicles built in Canada are sold in American markets. This integration has been the foundation of North American automotive competitiveness. But Carney's deal with China shreds that integration and replaces it with direct Chinese competition flooding the North American market. According to terms of the agreement reported in Canadian business press, Chinese automakers, including BYD, Geely, and SAIC, will establish manufacturing facilities in Canada with the explicit goal of producing 2 million electric vehicles annually by 2028, primarily for export to North America. These vehicles will be 40–50% cheaper than American-made EVs due to Chinese government subsidies, lower labor costs, and integrated battery supply chains that American manufacturers cannot match. And because of USMCA trade rules, vehicles manufactured in Canada qualify for duty-free access to the American market. Translation: Chinese EVs will flood into the United States through Canada, bypassing tariffs and selling for prices that will bankrupt American automakers. Ford, GM, and Stellantis are already hemorrhaging money on EV development. This deal could be the final blow that forces them into bankruptcy or foreign acquisition. But Carney didn't make this deal because he loves China. He made it because Trump pushed him into Beijing's arms. According to Canadian officials cited in Ottawa diplomatic reporting, the decision to pursue the China partnership was a direct response to Trump's repeated suggestions that Canada should become the 51st state and his threats to impose punishing tariffs on Canadian exports. Canada's message to Washington is brutally clear. If you treat us as a territory to be conquered rather than an ally to be respected, we will find new partners, and those partners will destroy your industries. And it's working. According to polling data from multiple Canadian surveys, approximately 73–75% of Canadians are now actively boycotting American products in response to Trump's threats. Canadian supermarkets report American goods sitting unsold on shelves. Canadian consumers are switching to European, Asian, and domestic alternatives. And American companies are watching a $400 billion annual market evaporate in real time. This is not theoretical economic warfare. This is actual measurable damage happening right now. But the economic warfare is not even the most damaging revelation, because what's happening behind the scenes is even more shocking. Trump is conducting espionage operations against allied nations while simultaneously leaking intelligence to Russia. According to reports from Danish intelligence services and statements from Danish government officials to Scandinavian media, the Danish government has formally accused the Trump administration of conducting covert intelligence operations in Greenland. The alleged operations include deployment of CIA operatives posing as tourists or contractors to map Greenland's military installations, port facilities, and infrastructure, electronic surveillance of Danish government communications regarding Greenland's defense capabilities and political leadership, cultivation of sources within Greenland's local government to gather intelligence on public opinion, political vulnerabilities, and potential collaboration in the event of American intervention. This wasn't a routine intelligence gathering operation. This was preparation for invasion. And Denmark, a NATO ally, was the target. A Danish defense ministry official reportedly told European media, "We are being treated not as an ally, but as an enemy to be infiltrated and weakened. This is a fundamental betrayal of the alliance that has kept peace in Europe for the past 80 years. But the espionage scandal was worse, much worse. According to reports from French intelligence sources and confirmed by Ukrainian officials, France and Ukraine executed a counterintelligence operation in late December 2025 that proved what many suspected but could not confirm: the Trump administration is leaking classified intelligence directly to Russia. Here's how the operation worked. French and Ukrainian intelligence services fabricated detailed but false information about alleged Ukrainian military operations, Russian troop movements, and NATO planning discussions. This fake intelligence was then deliberately fed to American intelligence channels, including briefings provided to U.S. military liaisons and intelligence officers stationed in Europe. The information was marked with subtle, unique identifiers, essentially digital watermarks, that would reveal if the intelligence was passed to unauthorized parties. Within 72 hours, Russian military communications intercepted by Ukrainian signals intelligence contained the exact fake information, including the unique identifiers that had been fed to American channels. The conclusion is inescapable. Someone in the Trump administration received the intelligence and passed it directly to Russian counterparts. This is not a leak. This is active collaboration with an adversary currently at war with a U.S. ally. French President Macron reportedly confronted the U.S. ambassador to France with evidence of the compromise, demanding an explanation for how American intelligence channels had become a conduit for Russian espionage. The White House has issued no response, no denial, no investigation, just silence. Because what can they say? The evidence is documented. The watermarks don't lie. And America's allies now have proof that trusting the United States with sensitive information is the same as handing it directly to Vladimir Putin. While Trump threatens allies and leaks to enemies, the rest of the world is moving on without America. And the speed of that movement should terrify every American who understands what global power actually means. On January 14th, 2026, the European Union and Mercosur, the South American trade bloc, including Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay's a comprehensive free trade agreement creating a unified market of over 700 million consumers. This is one of the largest trade deals in history, and the United States is not part of it. While Trump threatens tariffs, Europe is signing deals. While America demands tribute, China is building infrastructure. While Washington leaks intelligence to Moscow, the rest of the world is constructing a global economy that doesn't need American participation. At the United Nations, the evidence of American isolation is even more stark. According to diplomatic sources and UN voting records, when the United States recently called for international support in confronting Iranian nuclear development, not a single traditional ally endorsed the American position. Not the UK, not France, not Germany, not Canada, not Japan, not South Korea. Zero allies backed the U.S. position. Why? Because America's credibility is gone. When you threaten to invade Greenland, when you leak intelligence to Russia, when you demand billions in protection payments, allies stop believing anything you say. One European UN diplomat reportedly told colleagues, "How can we support American security initiatives when American forces are threatening to invade Allied territory? How can we trust American intelligence when we know it goes straight to the Kremlin?" The United States is not a security partner anymore. It's a liability. But perhaps the most brazenly corrupt element of Trump's foreign policy is what's being called the Board of Peace, an alleged shakedown operation demanding billions in payments for American diplomatic support. According to investigative reports from international media and leaked documents circulating among diplomatic channels, the Trump administration has established an informal council that allegedly requires foreign governments to deposit massive sums into accounts held at banks in Qatar in exchange for favorable U.S. policy positions. The scheme allegedly works like this. Countries seeking American support on international issues, whether UN votes, trade negotiations, or security assistance, are approached by intermediaries connected to the Trump administration. These intermediaries allegedly suggest that contributions to specific accounts ranging from $500 million to $5 billion, depending on the request, would facilitate positive American engagement. The funds are deposited not to U.S. government accounts, but to private banking institutions in Qatar, where financial transparency is limited and tracking is difficult. In exchange, the U.S. allegedly provides diplomatic support, favorable trade terms, or security commitments. This is not foreign policy. This is a protection racket, and it is allegedly being run out of the White House. The corruption is so blatant that even nations desperate for American support are reportedly refusing to participate, recognizing that paying tribute to a president does not guarantee policy stability when that president operates without institutional constraints. America is not leading the free world. It is extorting it, and the world is responding by building alternatives that exclude us entirely. While economic and intelligence wars rage, European militaries are preparing for something previously unthinkable: armed conflict with the United States. Operation Arctic Endurance, a joint military exercise involving Denmark, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Norway, and Sweden, began on January 10th, 2026 in Greenland. The official justification: defense of sovereign territory and preparation for high-intensity Arctic operations. The reality? According to military analysts and leaked planning documents, this is a defensive rehearsal specifically designed to counter potential American military intervention in Greenland. The exercise scenarios reportedly include defense against amphibious assault operations consistent with U.S. Marine Corps doctrine, air defense integration to counter American stealth aircraft and cruise missiles, cyber defense and communication security to prevent American electronic warfare from disrupting command and control, coordination with civilian resistance movements, suggesting planning for insurgency operations in the event of occupation. This is not a training exercise. This is war preparation. And the enemy being trained against is the United States military. When NATO allies are drilling to fight American forces, the alliance is not weakened, it is functionally dead. My friends, we are witnessing something that has never happened in American history: the simultaneous coordinated abandonment of U.S. leadership by every major democratic ally. Europe is preparing economic weapons that could collapse the U.S. economy. Canada has aligned with China to destroy American industries. Allies are conducting counterintelligence operations to catch American leaks to Russia. and NATO partners are training to defend themselves from American military intervention, this is not a temporary diplomatic spat. This is the structural collapse of American credibility. Trump is not making America feared. He is making America irrelevant. The world is not bending to American threats. It is building systems specifically designed to function without American participation. The $8 trillion bond weapon is loaded. The trade bazooka is aimed. And the only question remaining is whether Trump will give Europe a reason to pull the trigger. Because if he does, the American economy will not survive the retaliation. And the empire that took 80 years to build will collapse in 80 days. So what do you think? Is Europe bluffing about the economic countermeasures? Or are we watching the final days of American global dominance play out in real time? The evidence is undeniable. Allies are preparing for economic war. Canada has chosen China over the U.S. Trump is leaking intelligence to Putin, and the rest of the world is moving on without us. This is not a negotiation anymore. This is a divorce. And America is about to learn that when you betray every ally you have, you don't get to keep the house, the car, or the kids. The empire is ending. The only question is whether it ends with a whimper or an explosion. And based on what Europe is preparing, it's going to be an explosion that rattles the entire global economy.